What truly is the Shiva Lingam? I want to explain to you why the Shiva Lingam is the most complete and perfect symbol in the entire world. Now, there are so many superficial understandings and misinterpretations of what the Shiva Lingam actually is. But I want to explain to you the two deepest understandings of the Shiva Lingam from the two spiritual traditions that embody the symbol the most. First, Advaita Vedanta, and then also Kashmir Shaivism, which is known as the Trika system or simply known as Trika Shaivism. Now, first, what is the imagery we are seeing with the Shiva Lingam from a purely superficial understanding? And a lot of people get caught in this superficial understanding without any deeper understanding of what the symbol is actually implying, right? And so first, when we look at the Shiva Lingam, it's composed of two parts. Now, first, the lingam part at the top is in the shape of a phallus. Now, this is not in reference to male genitalia per se, but it will make more understanding of why that is shaped as a phallus as we go further into this lesson. Now, the base of the Shiva Lingam is known as the yoni. Now, the yoni is in the shape of the female genitalia, but just as with the phallus or the lingam, this is not in reference to the female genitalia per se, even though when we understand this at a deeper level, then you will understand why these are in the shape of the male genitalia and the female genitalia, because it represents something at a much greater level, deeper level, but it also represents something also to us on a personal level as well, but we're looking at it from the greater understanding, not from a superficial understanding, where a lot of people get caught in the superficial understanding of the Shiva Lingam being in the shape of a phallus and the female genitalia. Now, this is why actually some people call this symbol the lingam yoni, right? Because you've got the lingam, the male genitalia, and the yoni, the female genitalia. So you have the lingam yoni. But like I said, you don't want to understand that from a superficial context, because this symbol, as I mentioned, is the most complete and perfect symbol in the entire world. It is the symbol that represents all and everything in the best way possible, right? So there are many symbols that try to convey the all and everything. Call it God, call it Brahman, Tao, if you will. But this symbol represents everything, and you'll understand that when I get into these two interpretations. Now, the first interpretation, as I said, is the tradition of Advaita Vedanta. The Shiva Lingam is very important in Advaita Vedanta. And the Shiva Lingam, not just in Advaita Vedanta, but also in Kashmir Shaivism, is a representation of Brahman in its totality, right? So we're talking about the ultimate reality of existence, the Brahman. Now, you at your core are the Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness, which is identical with Brahman, right? And so as the Atman, we are one with the totality of existence, and that is Brahman. So the Shiva Lingam represents the Brahman, right? But it represents it in two parts. Not just, we're not just talking about here simply the male and female genitalia, right? What we're talking about here is Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. Now, Nirguna Brahman means Brahman without qualities. So the ultimate undifferentiated consciousness of reality, the non-dual pure consciousness without any qualities. And Nir means not, right? So not with. Now, the second component is Saguna Brahman. Now, Saguna Brahman is Brahman with qualities. Sa means with, right? So it has qualities. And guna actually simply means qualities. And there are three fundamental gunas that make up our existence, which is Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, right? So these are the three gunas. And Brahman itself is made up of these two components, Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman. It's not just simply Brahman alone without any sort of differentiation, and we'll get into why this is important. So when we look at the lingam aspect of the Shiva Lingam, right, this represents the Nirguna aspect of Brahman. This is the unmanifest reality without qualities, right? Without qualities, beyond everything. It's beyond everything. This is the nirguna aspect, is the lingam, is the male genitalia aspect of the Shiva Lingam. So you could think of this aspect, the nirguna aspect, in terms of a type of ultimate substratum. Some people will even use nothingness to try and relate to this. And it can also be related in some aspects to Uchi in Taoism, right? Uchi being the ultimate aspect of Tao, right? Tao of stillness. And so this can be related to that. And so the nirguna aspect is beyond all qualities, and it is something supreme beyond intellectual comprehension, something beyond intellectual comprehension. Keep that in mind, right? This is the nirguna aspect of Brahman. This is the phallus aspect, the lingam aspect of the Shiva Lingam. And so the other aspect, the yoni, right, the female genitalia, is the saguna aspect. So this is the manifest world. And this basically means Brahman with qualities. As I said, Brahman with qualities, which is the manifest world. And this means all of the matter and energy of the universe and the physical and psychological realities that we live in, or that we believe we live in. And so this is all of that. And so if we were to use a term from Samkhya and Yoga, this is the Prakriti aspect of reality. Prakriti being the nature of reality, right? And so this is the nature of the world. And so that means the manifest world of matter and energy. That's what Prakriti is. And this is what Saguna is, right? And so this is what the yoni represents. It represents that Saguna aspect of reality. And so you see here these two aspects of reality, right? So you've got Brahman in its totality, which is the Shiva Lingam, right? But then you've got the nirguna aspect, the lingam, and then you've got the saguna aspect, which is the yoni. Both go together as one, mutually unified opposites, so to speak, right? But they are unified. And so this is a way of differentiating between the manifest and the unmanifest, but understanding it's all one thing. And so all in all, the ultimate understanding is to not comprehend one aspect of Brahman without the other. They both go together as one. This is what is important. One don't exist without the other. We have to think about it in a holistic way. But for sure, some schools would disagree with that to a certain extent, but this is the Advaita Vedanta perspective, for example. But one aspect of Advaita Vedanta might disagree a tiny bit, especially if we talk about maybe the Gaudapada schools of Advaita Vedanta, where they might say that the Brahman's ultimate nature is actually the nirguna aspect, is the ultimate substratum. And that is true to a certain extent. And they might consider that the Saguna is actually an illusion and is related to Maya, the illusion of measurement, right? The illusion of the manifest world that we measure, and we forget that the totality is Brahman. And so that's probably what Gaudapada might say to us. But isn't Nirguna Brahman the ultimate? But this is to neglect the yoni aspect of the Shiva Lingam, right? The Saguna aspect of the Shiva Lingam. So the problem with that perspective, that nirguna is the ultimate reality, that the lingam itself without the yoni is the ultimate reality, is that the nirguna Brahman aspect cannot know itself without the Saguna Brahman aspect. Because the nirguna Brahman aspect would be inert without any dynamism or qualities. And so it could not know itself. And sure, we could say that the nirguna aspect is the ultimate ground of being, but the ultimate wants to express itself through us so that we can eventually find it, right? And this reminds me of the ultimate game of hide and seek, as Alan Watts put it, right? So Brahman is playing hide and seek with itself. And it kind of reminds me of that analogy that he used. And that's kind of how these two go together, right? The Saguna aspect is there, the manifest world is there, so that we can understand the Nirguna aspect, right? They both go together as one. You cannot have one without the other. That's the point of the symbol of the Shiva Lingam. And so that is why Brahman is only complete when we understand the Shiva Lingam as a whole and not as two separate realities. Because both aspects are mutual unified opposites. The lingam and the yoni are mutual unified opposites. They are actually a whole. There actually is no separation, but there needs to be a distinction so we understand this symbol in its totality, and we understand that what is happening in the Saguna realm, in the Yoni realm, is not everything that is going on. The lingam is impregnating life with Brahman itself, which will make sense as we get into the next interpretation, right? But that's the Advaita Vedanta interpretation. Now, the next interpretation is from Kashmir Shaivism or Trikya Shaivism, right? And they look at this a little bit differently than Advaita Vedanta. They look at the Shiva Lingam a little bit differently, but not too differently, but just a little bit differently, and just a different understanding of what is going on here. Because, as I said with the Advaita Vedanta system, is that sometimes a lot of the teachers in the tradition can think of the Saguna aspect as an illusion in and of itself, and not consider both aspects of the Shiva Lingam. But from the Kashmir Shaiva perspective, Nirguna Brahman would not be higher than Saguna Brahman, because, as I said in the Advaita Vedanta interpretation, that Nirguna Brahman is nothing without Saguna Brahman, and Saguna Brahman in turn is nothing without Nirguna Brahman. They both go together as one. And so when we look at it from this perspective of the Kashmiri Shaiva, when we look at the Yoni, what are we looking at when we look at the Yoni? Of course, we're looking at the Saguna realm, right? But they see Saguna as the Shakti, right? The Shakti of the world. Now, what do they mean by calling the Saguna realm Shakti? Well, what they are talking about is that the manifest world here, right? This manifest world that we exist in is the energy of Shiva. It's not an illusion. It's the energy of the ultimate. Now, Shiva here being a representation of Brahman, right? When we look at Shaivism, Shiva is the ultimate representation of Brahman. Whereas when you look at Vaishnavism, Vishnu is the ultimate representation of Brahman. But we're looking at it from a Shaiva perspective because we are looking at the Shiva Lingam. And so this manifest world that we live in is not an illusion per se, but is the energy of Shiva. We're still playing that game of hide and seek, right? Which we're still caught in this dualistic world, and we think we are this person and they are separate from us, but it's just Shiva playing hide and seek. And from the Kashmiri Shaiva perspective, it's trying to find Shiva in this manifest world, right? So, but this is the energy of Shiva, right? This is the power of the ultimate, what we exist in. And so from this perspective, the Yoni as Shakti is the motherly feminine energy of the universe, and the Lingam is moving its energy out from its center into manifestation, which leaves us with this reality that we have. This is the power of Shiva, remember? And so the Lingam is moving its energy into Shakti. And so the power of the divine is moving through the manifest world, right? Shiva is moving itself through Shakti. And this is why we have this reality that we have. This is the other side of the coin, as I used in the Advaita Vedanta perspective. You've got the Nirguna side of the coin, the Saguna side of the coin, right? And so in Kashmir Shaivism, we can contrast that with Shiva and Shakti, right? Shiva is impregnating Shakti, and then it's giving life to existence, right? And so we have then this manifest world. Shiva is the unmanifest reality, right? It's still, from the Kashmir perspective, Shiva is the Lingam, the Yoni is Shakti, right? And so together, this is the divine marriage, right? Shiva and Shakti, the divine marriage. This is a deeper level of the story of the divine marriage of Shiva and Parvati, right? And so you've got the Lingam, which is Shiva, you've got the Yoni, which is Shakti. And so you can see the similarities here with the Advaita Vedanta perspective and the Kashmir Shaivism perspective, right? And so this is the deeper reality, right? Shiva is moving through the world. It's moving through us and is us. And the game of life is to realize that we are it. We're not something separate from it, right? That's what Shakti facilitates. That's what this motherly, feminine, natural world is. It is here so we can understand the ultimate reality, which is Shiva, right? This, again, is that union of masculine and feminine. And the union of masculine and feminine is Shakti as the feminine and Shiva as the masculine. But in this sense, there is no separation, right? There is no separation. Like I said with Nirguna and Saguna, you cannot know Shiva without Shakti. And in turn, Shiva is inert and unmanifest and cannot know itself without Shakti. And so Shakti cannot know itself without Shiva. And we can keep going on and on and on, right? But this is how it is. What appears as two is ultimately one. And this is the non-dual aspect. And those with the spiritual aptitude to understand that non-duality through the apparent duality go to that higher level of understanding. You don't just go, it's all Shiva. It's only all Shiva when you understand it through Shakti. And that is the nature of the Shiva Lingam. Now, this reminds me of the rituals that the Brahmin priests perform, right? When they perform arti, right? They perform arti over the Shiva Lingam in the temples, especially in India. There's a secret to this ritual, right? And so when they perform arti, they pour milk, curd, honey, ghee, etc. over the Shiva Lingam. And what this represents is that we're pouring all of this curd and milk and ghee and honey over the Shiva Lingam, and it's coming out the yoni and pouring out into the world. Do you see this ritualistic metaphor here? It's Shiva pouring itself through the yoni into the world. That's part of the ritualistic metaphor of what the Brahmin priests are performing when you see them perform arti over the Shiva Lingam. That's something for us to deeply contemplate when we see the Brahmins perform this ritual. Keep that in your mind. They're pouring the curd, the ghee, the honey, etc. over the lingam, and it's coming out the yoni and pouring into the world, right? Think about how we are brought into this world, right? So we are brought into this world through the yoni. We come in through the yoni. We come from the lingam, which then moves through the yoni, and then we exist in the manifest world. That's a microcosm of how the ultimate reality, Brahman, is here, right? How the Shakti came about. And so that's a macrocosmic understanding. But ourselves are a microcosm of that. We are a mirror of that ultimate Brahman, right? That ultimate Shiva. And so think about that. Think about that. That should be an epiphany for most. That's how we come into the world, exactly how the Brahmin priests are performing this ritual over the Shiva Lingam. And so Shiva impregnates Shakti and moves through the world with life, right? And we are that life, and everywhere is that life. All of this manifest world is that life, and we are that. And that is the ultimate significance of the Shiva Lingam. And so please leave a comment below which interpretation means most to you, the Advaita Vedanta interpretation or the Kashmir Shiva interpretation. But I just find both interpretations beautiful as they are, and there is a lot of symmetry between them and a lot of relation between them. So I hope you're all safe and sound, and I'll see you all in the next one. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.